Judge Clarence Thomas breaks silence and speaks up to expose liberals' biggest scam forever. Usually, the wisest people are the ones who tend to keep quiet until necessary to speak. Clarence Thomas is one of those people. When he does speak, he tends to deliver some serious news. After hearing what Thomas revealed about their huge scam, the left will hate him even more than they used to. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas spoke at the Library of Congress and explained that he was worn down, quote unquote, by what is going on in our country's culture. He stated, quote, "At some point we're going to be fatigued with everyone being the victim," unquote. And he's right. Other generations used to work very hard every single day of their lives, but times are changing. The snowflake generation is emerging, and they are replacing hardworking Americans. Thomas talked about his grandfather in order to contrast how much things have changed when it comes to work ethic. Thomas explained, quote, "With 9 months of education, he never saw himself as a victim. He used to say that he was a motherless child. He never knew his father. His mother died when he was 7 or 8 years old. Of course, they didn't have the birth certificates then, so he never knew quite how old he was. You always have to play the hand you're dealt. If you're dealt a bad hand, you still have to play it. When we would whine about things, if you look at the bust in my office that my wonderful wife had made for me when I went out on the court, his favorite quote was, 'Old man Kent is dead. I helped bury him.' He's right. And the one thing that is really holding a person back is themselves. The only person who can hold someone back is themselves."
Life didn't start out too easy. You mentioned in the book that you grew up in Pinpoint, and then when you're in a home which didn't have water, didn't have electricity, when the house burned down, you moved to Savannah and conditions got worse. I think you write that in the winter of 1995, you remember being hungry.
1955.
1955.
Yeah, boy, I was doing fine in 1995.
1955, you were hungry without knowing when you would eat, and cold without knowing when you would be warm.
That's a horrible feeling. But you know, today I just get worn down. I was with a young woman who happened to be black in Kansas recently, and she said something really interesting. She said, "I'm really tired of having to play the role of being black. I just want to go to school." And I think at some point, we're going to be fatigued with everybody being a victim. When I was a kid, there were tons of people who were in really bad circumstances. My grandfather would not let us wallow in that. And as you could tell throughout this book, he's my hero. He is the single greatest human being I've ever met, with 9 months of education. But he never saw himself as a victim. He used to say that he was a motherless child. He never knew his father. His mother died when he was 7 or 8 years old. Of course, they didn't have birth certificates then, so he never knew quite how old he was. And then he was raised by his grandmother, who was a freed slave. Then she dies, and then he lives with an uncle who has 12 or 13 kids, and who was a hard man. And yet, he never complained. And he always said, he would have this saying, when you'd want to whine or something, he said, "You know, you have to play the hand you're dealt." He'd always said, in those days, blacks played bid-whist a lot. And he'd say, you always have to play the hand you're dealt. If you're dealt a bad hand, you still have to play it. And when we would whine about things, if you look at the bust in my office that my wonderful wife had made for me when I went on the court, his favorite quote was, "Old man Kent is dead. I helped bury him." That is what I grew up with. That was I don't know if you saw the movie.